This is the last of the video lessons for the chapter 4-5 section of the course. Again, starting off, talked about how we classify things as being living or non-living. Then we talked about how living things are classified, how they're named. We talked about binomial nomenclature and scientific names, where they came from. We talked about different tools like cladograms and dichotomous keys that they use to determine relationships and to identify organisms. The phylogenetic tree that shows their evolutionary relationships. That was the first part of chapter 4, so sections 1 and 2. Then we talked about viruses and why they're considered non-living. We talked about how they reproduce in a host cell, so the lytic and lysogenic cycles. In chapter 5, we were dealing with mostly microorganisms. So they're talking about the first 4 kingdoms. The first 2 were bacteria and archaea, which are prokaryotes. So this is just going back to the summary chart. Remember the prokaryotes, domain bacteria, kingdom archaea, domain bacteria has kingdom bacteria in it. Domain archaea has kingdom archaea in it. Both groups include unicellular organisms, which are motile. Some of them are autotrophs, some are heterotrophs, but they differ very much in their structures, their cell wall structure, and their biochemistry and DNA. So they, instead of having 5 kingdoms, they went to a 6 kingdom system, and so now we have kingdoms bacteria and archaea, which are separate, and domains higher to that. So domain bacteria with kingdom bacteria, domain archaea with kingdom archaea. The archaea, remember, live in extreme conditions because the properties of their cell walls allow them to withstand extreme conditions. They're on the couch, honey. Then we talked about kingdom protista, the first of the eukarya domains, so the eukaryotes. We remember organisms were grouped in kingdom protista because they were not fungus, plant, or animal-like enough in nature to be put into those kingdoms. So there's 3 main groups within kingdom protista: the animal-like ones, the plant-like ones, and the fungus-like ones. Most of them are unicellular. Only the seaweeds are the multicellular ones. They have no cell walls. They're mostly motile. Some of the seaweeds are not. Some are autotrophs, some are heterotrophs. And these were some of the examples, if you remember. This time we're going to talk about kingdom fungi. So we'll take a look at this chart again when we're through. But kingdom fungi. So probably the first thing that comes to your mind when we talk about kingdom fungi are mushrooms, because that's the easiest example to remember. Kingdom fungi are all heterotrophs. Okay, so they used to be kind of considered like plants because they don't move around. They're like plants in that they don't move around. They're kind of fixed in their position, or sessile. But because they can't make their own food, they were put into their own kingdom. Okay, so they are heterotrophic. Most are multicellular. The only one that's not is yeast. So yeast belongs to this group. They like to live in dark, moist, warm places, as opposed to plants, which really need light, and they like warm places. But fungi really like to grow in places like in your sneakers, and in your closet, and in your fridge, and in those little cupboards that you tend to keep your bread in. So yeah, they really like those places. Again, they're non-motile or sessile, so that just means they can't move around. Their cell walls are made of chitin. whereas plant cell walls are made of cellulose, so they have very different structure as well. Fungi consist of hyphae. We call them hyphae, a hypha singular, and a hypha is it's a fine filament, so it's like a little stringy part. Under the soil, you'd find a network of them, so a whole bunch of them, a mass of them, which is called a mycelium, and that forms the bulk of the organism. So while the mushroom is up here, the mycelium, the whole vast mass of hyphae or thread-like parts, would be found under the ground. Walls of tissue will divide the mycelium and separate the regions, and those walls of tissue are just the same as what we call the wall of tissue that divides our heart. So it's called a septum, singular, or septa, plural. Another feature of kingdom fungi is that the organisms undergo extracellular digestion. So they digest their foodstuff by, this is a description at the bottom, they grow on their food source. So this mold is growing on the orange, for instance, and the hyphae that are there, the little filaments that are there, will release enzymes out onto the orange, and they'll break it down. And then their other hyphae will absorb the digested particles, so the smaller particles, back in so that they can be nourished and have energy. So that's extracellular digestion. And these are just some examples. This is a form of bracket fungi and mushrooms and molds. Those are some examples. So fungi are divided into phyla according to their patterns of sexual reproduction. So we have phylum Zygomycota, Basidiomycota, Ascomycota, and Deuteromycota. So if you look at all of the names, it says, what do they all have in common? Yep, I think you got it. They all have mycota at the end. Just like when we talked about the fungus-like protists, mycota means fungus. Okay, so phylum Zygomycota. We're taking a look at this one first. They include bread molds. That's probably the easiest example, and we're going to take a look at one under slide. They feed off of dead organic matter, so that means we call them saprotrophic or saprotrophs. So they feed off of things that aren't living anymore usually. So bread was never really living, but it's organic matter that is not living anymore. Okay? They get their names from zygospores. So the first part of the phylum name is kind of a hint to what their sexual structures are. So they produce zygospores when conditions are unfavorable. So if it's too dry, for instance, or if it's too light and it's not favorable for them to exist, then they'll produce zygospores, and the zygospores are really able to withstand really harsh conditions, and so then it allows them to kind of be dormant for a long time, and then when conditions are good, then they'll be able to come back up. So we will take a look a little later at what the zygospore looks like, but basically they reproduce sexually only when conditions are unfavorable. And let's see, I'll use this. So they use their zygospores when conditions are unfavorable to reproduce sexually. But they normally will reproduce asexually using sporangiophores. Okay, so this is a picture showing sporangiophores of a bread mold. So if you were looking at the piece of bread and you had a really good magnifying glass or a microscope that you could angle properly, then you would see these sticking up from the top. So when you get those little gray spots or the little black, what looks like gray to us, but it's really little black ones, this is what is forming. and the fungus has usually been there for a little bit before they actually show up. Okay, so this is a graphic showing what is there. The sporangiophore includes the whole thing. So if I were to draw it, the sporangiophore includes that whole thing. So it's like a stick with a ball at the end. The sporangium is the ball that's at the end. Okay, sporangia, plural. And that is the part that actually releases the spores. So these are the spores that are all these little things. They're the spores that are going to be released. So basically, the sporangiophore is an asexual reproductive structure. So that means it's going to produce spores that are going to make things just like the original fungus. Okay, so the sporangiophore is a type of hyphae that is reproductive in nature. There are other types of hyphae that are listed down here too. So we just talked about the sporangiophore. The stolon, I wonder, can I change the color? Sure, let's change the color. The stolon is, oh, no, didn't change the color. Oh, there we go. The stolon is this part here. So it's a horizontal hypha, and it's allowing the fungus to spread horizontally across the bread. So not only can it spread by spores kind of falling or being blown by air currents across the substrate or to somewhere else. So maybe there's another hunk of bread in the bag, then it'll go to the other hunk of bread. But they'll also spread horizontally under the surface using a stolon. Charlie, shh. Okay, so that's the stolon. The third type, let me get another color. Oh, this is fun. No, that's not going to show up well enough. Let's try this one. Purple. Okay, Charlie. The third type are the rhizoids. Oh, I didn't save it. Okay, the third type are the rhizoids. So these are, oh my goodness, what color is that? That's not good. Let's go with orange. Okay, the third type are these ones down here that look like little mini roots. So they act like little mini roots, and they anchor it into the substrate. So the substrate is the word that we use for whatever it is that they're growing and feeding on. So in this case, the bread would be its substrate. Okay, so it's going to anchor it into the bread. Okay, reproduction in zygomycota. Alright, so this is a little bit more complicated than what I'm necessarily going to expect you to know. But I will give you life cycles, and I'll expect you to recognize, is this the life cycle of a zygomycota, like the bread mold, or is it one of the club fungi, which we're going to talk about next? Okay, so a couple of things. Okay, so, make this big again. But you're like right on top of me, Charlie. Okay, so this is showing a picture up here in the corner of the asexual structure. So the sporangiophore, remember, is the asexual structure in the bread mold. And what happens is they will produce spores, sporangiospores, that will kind of land on the surface, and they'll form strains or new strains that will start to grow. Each of these is what we call haploid, where they have one copy of chromosomes. If you think of our cells, ours were made by the union of an egg and a sperm. Each one of them has a copy of chromosomes. So when they come together, the inside of each of our cells, we now have a copy from the sperm and a copy from the egg. So we have a double set of chromosomes. Okay, it's like a full complement, or a full set of chromosomes has two sets within it. Okay, so we call that diploid, or 2N is how they'll write it. So down here, if this is kind of like if it was egg and sperm, then they come together and they unite. So we call them gametangia. Gametangia. Okay, so this is a strain or a hypha that has one set of chromosomes, and a second strain or hypha that has another set of chromosomes, and when they unite, they form a zygospore. Just like when our egg and sperm unite, they form a zygote. In the fungi, when the two hyphae unite, then we get a zygospore. So the zygospore has two sets of chromosomes. So it's kind of mixing the genetic information, just like it does from our mom and dad. It does from these two strains of fungus. Okay, and this is what it looks like. Almost looks like a hard candy with wrappers on the end. So we're going to have a look at those in the microscope. They will undergo something called meiosis. So the zygospore will undergo something called meiosis that will make spores. Okay, the myospores that will whenever conditions are better again, that will be released, and they'll form new hyphae. Okay, so the meiosis is a process. Meiosis is a process that happens. We're going to learn more about it in later chapters, and especially in grade 12 when we talk about human reproduction. But it is the process that happens, say, in the testes of a male and in the ovaries of a female in order to make our sex cells. Okay, so they make egg and sperm in us, which have only one set of chromosomes. So for this case, meiosis happens to take these cells of the zygospore and make them have only half the number of chromosomes. Okay, so now these new strains will again only have one set of chromosomes whenever they form. So that if conditions are not favorable again, then they can undergo the sexual cycle and form this hard zygospore that is really protective and can help them get through unfavorable conditions. So I'm going to include a link on the class notes for the website, but also on Edmodo, and you can go to the animation part and you can do the step through, which will do it in words, but you can do narrated, which will show you what happens and tell you as you're going through. So you can watch that and that can be helpful, but I'm not going to show the extras in this video because I'm taking a lot longer than I thought I would. So you should be able to identify, if I were to give you a graphic like this, you should be able to identify the zygospore and the parts of it. The zygospore, but the sporangiophore is what I mean. So the asexual structure and its parts. So this is the sporangium, and these would be sporangiospores. Okay, so this is asexual reproduction, and down here is sexual because it involves production of this guy right here, the zygospore. Okay? And recognize that it's reproduction in bread mold or zygomycota. Okay, so the next phylum is called Basidiomycota. So the common name for the zygomycota is it's zygospore fungi or zygote fungi. These ones, their common name for Basidiomycota is the club fungi, and it gets its common name from the shape of the sexual structure. Okay, so they are also mostly saprotrophic, so they tend to feed off of dead organic matter or non-living organic matter. But some of them are parasitic. They have these basidia, so in the gills of a mushroom, so the little almost like pages of a book that are on the underside of the mushroom. Those are the gills. And along each side of the gill would be the sexual structures, the basidia. Okay, so the basidia are club-shaped, and that's why they call them the club fungi. And they produce sexual spores called basidiospores. They will also reproduce asexually, so they only use these when conditions are unfavorable, but they also reproduce asexually using conidiophores. So these are the conidiophores. The conidiophores almost look like a broom. So instead of having a ball at the top, they have these longer thread-like parts with spores in them. Okay, so instead of a sporangiophore, it's a conidiophore. At the end, it's a conidia instead of a sporangium or sporangia, and the spores are conidiospores. So those are the asexual structure. So some examples of Basidiomycota mushroom. These are truffles. Puffballs, you know those puffballs that if you step on them when you're outside, then this puff of gray stuff whooshes out of it. Well, you're spreading the spores of the puffball at that point, but yeah, that's a puffball. Bracket fungi are also included, as well as smuts. Phylum Ascomycota are the sac fungi. So one trick that I use for this is if you rearrange asco, the first part of it, you get sac. Okay, so they are the sac fungi. They're also mostly saprotrophs, but some parasites. They produce sexual spores in an ascus, okay, and they're called ascospores. So the ascus is a sac, and the ascospores are the spores that you'd find inside of the sac. So if you look, this is a typical ascus with the ascospores, the red ascospores inside of it. So that's a typical sac fungus. And they'll form those in unfavorable conditions again. So this is a cup fungi. This one is, oh, I think I said it wrong. This is a puffball. I don't know why I was thinking that. They're not all that big though. Okay? But truffles are darker. This is a truffle. And they're used for cooking. Not chocolate truffles, no. But they are used for cooking. Yeast, the only unicellular fungus, is a member of the sac fungi. Okay, the ascospore here, this is the ascospore here. So it's a single ascus with the ascospores inside of it. Sorry. So the ascus is the sac. It's a singular sac. And then it has 4 ascospores inside of each one. But asexually, most of them, except for the yeast, will produce the conidiophores again. So conidiophores with conidia and conidiospores. And the yeast, on the other hand, they will reproduce asexually by budding. So here's a little video. Okay, so if you watch, this is a bud forming right here. It's really slow, but it was really small and then it got bigger. This one is forming a bud right here too. And it's going to speed up in a second once they give it some sugar solution. So you can see here's a big one with a little one growing off of it. Okay, there's a big one with a little one growing off of it, and you'll see them grow really quickly. There's a bud and it's growing really quickly off of that one. And then you'll see another one form off of it. So that's how see, budding. And then there's a new one. And then they'll keep on growing that way. They grow really quickly. So that's yeast growth. Very exciting, I know. Okay, so that is for the Ascomycota. So again, this is the conidiophore. Now I put them here. I really need to double check this because Basidiomycota may be unique in that they don't have an asexual structure. So So I will double check on that for you. But the kinidiophores are definitely, and maybe I'll copy and paste that into here. Okay, so the kinidiophores, this is, okay, so they look like a broom. So this would be the canidia at the end. The whole thing with the stick and the broom head would be the kinidiophore, and then the spores at the end are the kinidiospores. So that's what they use asexually. Most of them. Yeast are an exception. They're the only unicellular ones, and they reproduce asexually by budding. The last of the phyla for fungi is phylum Deuteromycota, and their common name is imperfect fungi, and basically they're all grouped here because they have no means of sexual reproduction, or it has not been identified yet. Okay, so the only way that they're known of to reproduce asexually is asexually, and to do that they use the kinidiophores. Okay, so you've seen the kinidiophores before, definitely with the Ascomycota. Again, I will double check on the Basidiomycota, but they are definitely for the Ascomycota and the Deuteromycota. Most are parasitic. Okay, and Penicillium used to be considered, and in the old textbook, I think it was still listed as Deuteromycota, but since then they've found that it does produce a sac-like structure during sexual reproduction, so it is grouped with the Ascomycota. Some examples are, this is ringworm, so a fungus that causes ringworm. This one is athlete's foot, that's ringworm on the face, and this is athlete's foot. So these are often found on us too, so there's a lot of parasitic Deuteromycota. And that brings us to some special relationships for fungi. So symbiotic relationships are a type where both the host and the organism living on it are benefiting. Okay, so it's a win-win kind of situation. So the two main kinds that I'll expect you to know about are the lichen, and the lichen is basically made up of a fungus and an algae. The fungus provides water, shelter, and elements, whereas the algae is able to undergo photosynthesis, so it provides the food. Okay, so you should know what the type of relationship is called, what the type of organism, I guess, that's there is called, what two things make it up, and what each of them provides within the relationship. So here's an example of a lichen, British soldier lichen. We have them on the island. You'd usually find them in the woodlands, and they're pretty cool. They're not very big. They're probably, I don't know, maybe an inch high or so. But they have these, they're like white with little red tops. So they're called British soldier lichen. Old man's beard, you've probably seen near your home even. It looks like a beard hanging from a tree. Okay, so that is another form of lichen. There's other lichens that are probably just in your backyard. There's sunburst lichen. Let me see. Oh, that's my little fella. Sunburst lichen. Okay, so this is sunburst lichen. So it's kind of orangish, yellowish. You'll find it on your trees in your backyard often. And oh, this one actually shows reindeer lichen too. So this is reindeer lichen, and it looks like little antlers. So it's more of a grayish one, and it looks like little antlers. So those are some of the common ones that you'd see around the island. Okay, the other type of relationship are called mycorrhizae, or mycorrhiza singular. Myco refers to the fungus part, and rhizae something to do with the roots. So fungus and roots of a plant. So those are the two parts. There's a fungus and it's associated with the roots of a plant. The fungus provides water and elements. The plant is often bigger than the fungus, so the fungus doesn't really provide shelter in this way. The plant provides food. Okay? So the plant and the algae in each of these is going to provide the food because they can undergo photosynthesis. Okay. The algae that are attached to the root hairs of plant will fix nitrogen into compounds so that can be used by the plant and its customers. So there are a couple of other really interesting fungal relationships. One is the fungus and the leafcutter ants, and the other is the cordyceps fungus and how it infects. This one's parasitic, and it infects bullet ants. There's a lot of different types of cordyceps, and each of them will attack a different type of organism. But I'm going to attach videos for those because they're really interesting, but they would add extra time onto this video. So you can watch them, and you might be asked just to tell briefly what happens in those relationships. Okay? That is it for this chapter. I will end off by summarizing kingdom. So we've done Protista, but kingdom fungi. Okay, another member of domain Eukarya. So they are eukaryotes. Most of them are multicellular. Okay, the only one that's not is yeast. Their cell walls are made of chitin. So different type of cell walls than you find in bacteria or archaea or plants. Plants have cell walls of cellulose. They are sessile or non-motile. In other words, they don't move around. And they're heterotrophs. Okay? So that ends it for chapter 5. Chapter 6 will deal with plants and animals. Please remember, anytime you have questions, just send me an email or a direct message in Edmodo, or make arrangements and we can get together at lunchtime or any time at all.